Welcome. My name is Glenn Yago. I'm a senior fellow and the founder of the Financial Innovation Lab at the Milken Institute. Speaking to you from Israel, where I direct the Fellows Program of the Milken Innovation Center at the Jerusalem Institute, along with the research and field work at our center with the Blum Lab for Developing Economies. In these Milken Institute calls, each week we bring together a diverse group of leaders who explore different industries, regions, or sectors that is responding to current challenges and offer creative outlines and solutions that the Milken Institute network can be active in as part of for positive impact. In previous sessions, we've worked on everything from strategic philanthropy to talking about market implications of the coronavirus. Our next seminar will be on August 27th on emerging zoonotic diseases and planetary health and stopping the next pandemic before it starts. We'll be focusing a lot on all of the links between biodiversity loss, the resulting pressure on agriculture and food value chains, and the rise of infectious diseases. We'll have Dr. Mark Smolinski on ending pandemics and Simone Friedman from EJF Philanthropies, and last but not least, Eric Good, who's a conservationist and director of King. So some housekeeping points. This call is going to be video recorded and it'll be available on the Milken Institute website very shortly. You can, at the bottom of your screen there, you can see the possibility of submitting questions in the right-hand corner on the Q&A feature. This is not just a conference call, but it really is a call to action today. And it builds upon the other discussions we've had in our financial innovations labs and in last year's global conference and the various summits, particularly in February at the Abu Dhabi summit that the Institute had, and it'll culminate in our discussions at the global conference October 12th to 21st. But today we're focusing really directly on the dual pandemic crisis. It's both a global health crisis, as we know, and an economic crisis has come up in all the different webinars we've had that's induced the global economy into a coma. We've just experienced a precipitous drop in demand, the disruption of global supply chains and the lockdowns that have been followed by a second wave, which has decimated the cash reserves for families, for businesses, and government. So how do we transition from that pandemic to realize the enormous potential growth that is demographically driven and economically driven for the rest of the century, and particularly for this decade ahead? How can we combine digital technologies and finance in a way that will create a more strong and robust and resilient post-pandemic recovery and build to a more inclusive and regenerative economy? So we're going to focus in, as we always do, on the how. How do we move beyond emergency relief to accelerate growth in the short term? And then how do we keep longer-term economic growth alive? Since 2015, in Addis Ababa, where 194 countries, who usually don't agree about everything, agreed about the Sustainable Development Goals, and afforded us and the $12 trillion business opportunities that exist for sustainable development that would catalyze human and social capital that empower productivity gains, not only in emerging and frontier economies, but in the developed economies as well. So what we have to do at this point is to push pedal to the metal on these financial and technology accelerators and pull together in our work to mobilize interregional trade and labor and capital markets in emerging and frontier economies to pull out of, as Carmen Reinhart warned us of, the new chairman of the new chief economist at the World Bank, the potential of a pandemic-triggered economic depression. This is also building on a webinar we had just last month to focus on what a lot of people have been referring to as ground zero of a very big deal. That big deal is impact investment. The ability to maximize returns and mitigate global risk in capital markets by producing impact through outcomes and results-based financing to really carve new channels of economic growth by pushing capital into the deal pipeline, and that requires investable projects. And these investable projects would provide the higher yields that would fund the long-term liabilities the developed world has, as the developing world does in health and education and food and energy security. And now we have metrics and measurement and management to be able to sustain that. If we look at the historical change that has gone on in emerging and domestic and frontier markets in the 21st century, as we move into the 21st century, it's been about 10 years or a little bit more since, as we see in this slide, that 50% of the global GDP is really actually over 60% of the global GDP is now in developing markets. Just think about that for a moment. In 1950, 70 years ago, 50% of the global GDP was concentrated only in the 15 advanced industrial economies. Today, 60% of it is in the emerging and frontier markets we're going to talk about today. And by mid-century, it'll be 70% of it will be in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, as we've discussed in a lot of these settings. This demographically driven growth is very key to the post-pandemic recovery. And growth will not return without ensuring that emerging and frontier markets are not left behind. It was always the right thing to do to build a global economy that was inclusive of new markets, but now we don't have any choice if we want to accelerate growth in the developed economies as well. Historically, the lack of that growth and unequal growth that's been unequal gains that have been shared unequally has led to an increase in systemic risk and a high frequency of crises. So now these sustainable development parameters are also emerging as part of the trajectory for frontier and developing economies in this post-pandemic period. So to frame this discussion today in this first part of our discussion, I really want to turn very quickly to Deputy Administrator Bonnie Glick and Gil Haskell, who have been entered into, between Israel and the United States, a series of MOUs over the last couple of years, from Power Africa, working last year, one with USAID as well, to work on new investment opportunities and new development opportunities that would really spur that growth and catalyze that growth. So the question here that I want to turn over is, what are investors getting wrong about? What steps do we have to do to change that narrative? And how can development and the investment community make impact investing more attractive to corporations and to be part, as I really like, Bonnie, you made that point in our preparatory discussions, how do we create a culture of hope in these countries for self-reliance and renewed growth? Bonnie, and I'll turn that over to you.
Oh, terrific. Glenn, thank you so much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's joining us today. I appreciate that you're here, and I hope that everyone is safe and healthy. I'm delighted to be joined today by my good friend, Ambassador Gil Haskell, the head of MASHAV, Israel's development agency. USAID's work with MASHAV is one of the many fruits of friendship between our two great nations. When one looks at or visits Israel today, it's easy to forget that Israel itself was a recipient of U.S. economic assistance until the 1990s. But over the past 20 years or so, Israel has grown to be among the most innovative countries in the donor community. The U.S. is proud of the role that our nation played in supporting Israel's journey to self-reliance, and we're even more proud to count Israel as one of our closest allies among donor nations. You can tell a lot about a country by its assistance model. Some countries manipulate recipients of their foreign assistance and use aid to drive nations into a spiral of dependency and debt. But U.S. assistance, like assistance from Israel and other like-minded donors, U.S. assistance is transparent. We encourage governments to be accountable to their citizens, not to far-off or hidden creditors. So it's only natural that our two development agencies work together, transparently and openly. After all, we have a shared vision for emerging market countries, one of prosperity and self-reliance. Our joint vision is based on transparency, democratic values, and the virtues of the free market. Predatory practices and market abuses by authoritarian countries in their so-called development assistance programs only serve to highlight the importance of transparent partnerships between assistance agencies from democracies like USAID and MASHAV. Our two governments and our two nations understand that when paired with accountable governance, private enterprise is the most powerful engine for lifting people out of poverty. That's why I'm grateful to the Milken Institute for bringing us together today. We know that governments will never have enough money to solve all the development challenges that are out there. But engaging with the private sector, bringing private capital to the table in the form of investments, job creation, and economic growth is what will lead emerging markets toward greater prosperity. During this time of COVID-19, we're all nervous about global markets. We're nervous at home about job losses and an economic downturn. But we're also confident that market forces will drive demand and growth back on an upward trend as we flatten the curve and work toward profound economic changes. Some of the changes will come because of COVID-19. Some will come despite it. But most will come about because the private sector was involved in some capacity. Now is not the time for the private sector to shy away from emerging and frontier markets. Now is the time to engage even more actively, more creatively, and with greater impact. Now it is incumbent on democratic governments to partner with the private sector to strengthen local markets and local businesses in emerging and frontier market countries. By working in these emerging and frontier markets, by demonstrating our commitments to these countries and to their development paths, we will lessen some of the risk associated with investments in them. Among the tools at our disposal, of course, are instruments for political risk insurance, first loss investments, technical assistance, capacity building, a whole lot of goodwill, and more. Now is the time to exercise all of the tools that we have. Today, private sources represent some 90% of financial flows into emerging markets. We encourage governments to make the process of private investment as free-flowing as possible, as reliable as possible, and as sustainable as possible. Our job as governments is to reduce political and regulatory uncertainty to make private investment more attractive. Of course, we recognize that some in the development field don't yet realize the value of engaging the private sector. And that's why it's so valuable that the Milken Institute has convened development experts and members of the private sector together today to encourage more of you to engage, to open up important discussions, and to demonstrate through your work the effectiveness of new approaches. Global investors will be much more keen on placing capital in emerging economies when they understand them better. USAID's goal is to make sure investors have the best possible information and to ensure that they have access to blended finance tools that reduce and share risks. One concrete example of this is USAID's program, it's a mouthful, called Mobilizing Institutional Investors to Develop Africa's Infrastructure, the MEDA program, which helps address potential misperceptions around investment risk in Africa. We focus on the $16 trillion strong U.S. institutional investor community. MEDA introduces mutual fund and pension fund investors to concrete opportunities for co-investment with their African counterparts in African emerging and frontier markets. With American expertise and participation, local pension fund consortiums have now begun to form in East and Southern Africa, driving local African savings into the real economy and building the homegrown expertise for Americans and Africans to finance jointly Africans' development. USAID is at the forefront of efforts to make projects more investor ready by providing first loss commitments to asset managers investing in underserved markets, such as women-led enterprises and digital financial services for low-income populations. At its core, investment supports self-reliance. Investment creates jobs and growth. Jobs and growth create prosperity. Perhaps the most exciting shared interest between USAID and MASHAV is our common pursuit of digital infrastructure that is secure, reliable, and open to all citizens. At USAID, along with our colleagues across the US government, we view trusted digital networks not only as a development opportunity, but also as a national security priority. Only 19% of people in the least developed countries use the internet, compared to 87% in the developed world. It's no surprise that emerging market countries are eager to establish trusted networks for their citizens and businesses. Why do I keep saying trusted? Because 5G in the wrong hands can be used to manipulate national sovereignty, national security, and human rights. And access to high-speed networks like those that 5G will bring is a priority for development and economic growth in emerging market countries. Now is the time to focus on 5G in emerging markets. By partnering with the private sector, we can get trusted digital solutions into countries that are looking to break into 5G, and we can build the relationships that are necessary for building out secure 5G before untrusted firms entrench themselves. USAID is also coordinating our advocacy, capacity building, and co-financing for 5G with other donors, including Israel, in emerging market countries. Recently, Ambassador Haskell joined a roundtable I chaired with representatives from 10 countries about deploying trusted 5G and communications networks into emerging markets. Trusted digital networks are essential for emerging economies' growth and good governance. Development agencies should work with export credit agencies and development banks to co-finance with private firms in their bids for spectrum and digital infrastructure. I started today talking about shared principles. Digital technology and security is one of the areas where principles of freedom and transparency matter the most. I know that Ambassador Haskell and I are on the same page about this, and we see this as a ripe opportunity for advancing the USAID MASHAV partnership from both a government and private sector perspective. I come from a background in business, and I've dedicated my time at USAID to deepening engagement between the development community and the private sector. Seeing both of these communities come together today brings me great joy. So with that, I look forward to a fruitful discussion with my colleagues from public and private sectors from around the world and with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bonnie. Let's turn it over to you, Gil, just to talk briefly about how you see this going forward, how we can focus on some of the very specific, really structural challenges that we have to get more projects in the field that are technology driven and have results.
Well, shalom to all of you from Jerusalem. First and foremost, I'd like to congratulate and thank the Milken Institute, and especially our moderator, Glenn Yago, my friend, for putting this meeting together in a very critical period for international development, and also thank my colleague, Bonnie Glick, Deputy Administrator of USAID, for joining me in co-addressing this opening session. Nice to see you, Bonnie. And of course, shalom and thanks to the distinguished panelists that we will be eager to hear from shortly, Minister Kaba, Mr. Masiwa, and Mr. Turner. I think the blend of speakers in this webinar is especially interesting and varied, and most unique will be hearing two perspectives to the topic which was outlined by Glenn. One from the largest international development agency, the USAID, and the other from one of the smallest, which is MASHAV. Exactly 1 year ago, I had the privilege of hosting USAID former Administrator Mark Green here in Israel on an official visit in which the United States and Israel agreed to expand collaboration between USAID and MASHAV in developing, emerging, and frontier markets in key areas of sustainable development, through co-innovation and the deployment of technological solutions to bolster and foster self-reliance, while putting vulnerable communities in the center and making sure no one is left behind. We signed a global MOU, and we are very much eager on implementing what was signed. I'd like to dedicate, Glenn, 2 to 3 minutes to speak about the global activities and international assistance implemented by MASHAV, Israel's Agency for International Development Cooperation. I'll try to highlight Israel's capabilities and expertise, as well as challenges regarding our development and humanitarian assistance in general, and most especially today, across the developing world and emerging markets. While I'll try to explain the policies and challenges under which we operate. I'll also try to touch upon the different opportunities for partnerships between MASHAV and USAID. Israel's unique story of rapid development owes so much of its progress to systematic problem solving, and has offered inspiration and solutions for developing countries all around the world, almost since Israel's establishment 72 years ago. It's important to understand that Israel has experienced rapid development under extremely testing circumstances, and has established itself as a leader in numerous fields such as climate-sensitive agriculture, water management, which we discussed, you and I, Glenn, just before going on air, emergency medicine, rehabilitation, education, immigrant absorption, psychosocial support, youth development, rural development, as well as cross-cutting issues such as women empowerment and gender equality, and many other fields. Along the years and in dozens of countries in the developing world, Israeli experts and expertise have been deployed to solve problems and improve the odds of survival. And for decades, a steady stream of professionals have come to Israel for training in a very wide range of fields. The challenging circumstances that Israel had to face and overcome have generated a uniquely valuable body of experienced trainers and expertise for the many developing countries that face similar hurdles. MASHAV conducts its extensive human capacity building program through specialized training extensions and affiliated professional study centers all around Israel, which provide the technical skills and personnel to conduct the professional programs, including courses in Israel and abroad in English, French, Spanish, Russian, and Arabic, as well as short and long-term consultancies in target countries. Since its inception 62 years ago, MASHAV's work in Africa and in turn in Latin America and Southeast Asia and the Pacific has been guided by the basic approach that Bonnie spoke about, that development work is organic and holistic in nature, and it's impossible to concentrate efforts in one area such as food security without providing proper attention to healthcare, community building, and education. And only through a sustainable and comprehensive development program can measured results be obtained and the desired impact can be felt by those who need assistance the most. Israeli assistance was built on the principles of sustainability from scratch, from the very first days of the establishment of MASHAV, long before the UN SDGs were crafted. But of course, the key for rapid development, as we have learned through the Israeli model, is the extensive use of innovation and the deployment of technological solutions in the long journey of bolstering and fostering self-reliance. And this, where we are trying to focus our development cooperation efforts today, bilaterally as well as trilaterally and multilaterally. And it's clear today that only the administrations that will invest heavily in development-based infrastructure and innovation will manage to transform from developing and emerging markets into mid-income, developed economies. MASHAV and USAID are in the process of identifying these target markets in which we can work together and pull them together into a new destiny. But we must always remember that the key lays in the hands of the target countries' administrations, who have to lead the efforts in an extremely proactive manner for these efforts to succeed. And that is where often we all make the mistake of attempting to replace the ownership of the problem and the solution from the hands of the local leadership. Just to offer an initial answer to the question you posed, Glenn, what are investors getting wrong about Africa? Never, and my advice is never take responsibility for any part of the process, but rather offer the most suitable and locally adaptable solution. The process, the problem and the process are always the responsibility of the local holders. I think the most important advice I can give on how to make impact investing more attractive to corporations and asset managers is to put much more efforts than are usually invested in adaptation of the technology to local standards, even if it means dramatic degrading, with initial ROI being less than the standard investment and mainly a lot of patience. And my last point is that, again, a question that you posed, Glenn, is when we build, what can we build the culture of hope on? And here comes to the stage the much needed cooperation between the investors, the innovators, and the international development agencies like USAID, like MASHAV, which must work together to penetrate not only the markets, but also the very conservative culture and generations of old habits and traditions, which have to be adjusted to accept the blending in of the new technologies sometimes, and then sometimes it requires an extensive process of proof and convincing on almost a personal basis of door-to-door mentoring, and this can only be done through a network of cooperation between the partners that I mentioned, together with local leaders. I'll stop here, and I know that we have more questions ahead of us. Again, thank you for this session.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Neil. It was really perfect in terms, for both of you, in terms of setting the table for this discussion. Let's segue into this discussion with our other panelists at this point. And just as we're doing that, as they're coming online, let's look at the notion of what blended finance, what impact investment is all about. If we would go to that slide 3, just to pull that up briefly. And we're talking about not only the $16 trillion in investment cap and institutional investment in the United States, but if we go one behind that, if we could, just for a second. But we're looking at $26 trillion worldwide, in terms of 26 and 31 trillion if we're looking at institutional investors elsewhere. Let's stay with this slide for a moment on global challenges. The litany of problems that we have only been thrown in stark relief by the pandemic, but they were all there in plain sight to people who've been working in development for a long time. But these litany of challenges are also opportunities, because it's investment targets that if we can bridge this gap of $5 to $7 trillion in about a net of around $2 trillion in SDGs, or the 23 trillion in climate, but take it down to about 5 trillion a year, and then the work that has to be done in terms of building economies that can solve the problems of people that are being forcibly displaced in the hotspots of the world, in those fragile economies where 40% of the global poor actually live. But the needs are vast in housing, 2 billion people without housing, the infrastructure gaps, 2 billion people that are unbanked, and so forth. But I think if we just would turn this over to our panelists now that are joining us, and I want to start off with Strive Hasawiya, is to, we look at those litanies of problems, Strive, but it always reminds me of that great line by Nelson Mandela that it always seems impossible to do it till it's done. You have been such a pioneer in telecommunications and building the internet through EcoNet and all the other enterprises that you've been engaged with. Now as a special envoy dealing with COVID response for the African Union as both a thought and action leader on the ground. What do you think needs to happen at this point in terms of how that we can take everything that we can do in our toolkit and apply it to sustainable development and growth, and blending these various investments so that we can meet the deeply intergenerational and international challenge we have before us? You've supported private sector development in Africa, and a great example of what it can build. But what lessons and direction can you give in this transition to aid, from aid to investment, in the initiatives that we have before us today?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to to join this discussion. As you pointed out, my day job is currently as a special envoy for Africa's COVID response. In fact, I'm as far away from what I normally do as I could imagine. I'm just coming from a discussion on the use of convalescent blood plasma as a tool for therapy with a group that was introduced to me by the Milken Institute. And that's a good example of what you can do from a private sector perspective. I'm just a private businessman. I'm not a politician. And in my day job, my main focus is responding to the needs of African consumers and listening to them. I think the gap is not a capital gap. It's a gap of trust and of listening to each other and not being prescriptive. And doing it in a respectful manner in which you appreciate that even if people are underdeveloped, they are sovereign in their nations and they have some pride. So you can't talk down to them, you have to listen to them. And sometimes they might opt not to have that investment in order to hold on to what you consider to be their pride. And if that's the option they take, it is their option. So from an African perspective, you must always bear in mind that we are not a nation, we're a continent. Physically, we can take in the United States and China and Europe into one place. So it's a continent of 55 sovereign nations. And so that we don't have a cookie cutter approach any more than you can have a cookie cutter approach towards Asia or towards Latin America. You know, you have to appreciate that countries are at different stages of development, you don't prescribe to Brazil what you find in Colombia. So you always bear in mind that it is a big place and it has different sovereign nations with national aspirations and hopes.
That's certainly true in so many markets in the history of economies, this transactional trust and how to build that up. Do you think technology has a way of helping us accelerate that, of trying to apply that? Thinking of your example, Dave, but let me go ahead, please.
Technology is always an amplifier and an accelerator. And even in the pursuit of solutions to deal with the current challenges, my team and I are reaching out all over the world. I've had amazing presentations with delegations from Israel, delegations from the United States, delegations from China. My job is to have an open mind and to listen for all the different technological solutions that could be of benefit to Africa.
Great. Let me take the discussion at this point. We'll circle back to talk a little bit more about how to connect those things in terms of how that applies both to health and water and energy. But Malado Kaba served as the first female minister of economy and finance in Guinea, currently working with Ora Bank in Guinea and 15 countries in Western Africa, and working also in energy and water issues. Malado, how can we advance digital disruption in the public sector that would decrease the amount of time and create innovative breakthroughs that would shape these markets more quickly and would allow us to channel investment into them?
Thank you. And first of all, hi to everyone, and many thanks to the Milken Institute for having me on this very interesting discussion. Maybe before answering your question as to the how, I think it may be useful to remind us of the why. Why is it important to advance disruptive innovation in the public sector? And that leads me to one of my recent article where I highlighted the need for Africa to seize the opportunities also offered with this terrible pandemic to push for progress in a number of areas. And one of them relates to the digital transformation in government and more generally in the public sector. Why? Because I strongly believe that the public sector is a powerful tool for inclusion, but it needs to undergo, I think, a sweeping transformation, which is partly, not mainly, but partly underpinned by that digital change. And I think that this, pushing for this agenda can actually lead us to achieve 3 key objectives that are actually related to risk perception in Africa, and also related to how to increase Africa's investment attractiveness. So the first objective that digital transformation helps us do is to increase transparency and efficiency. And you know, as a finance minister, I used to tell my staff half jokingly that we need to stop behaving as if we were in a witch house where we cook unpalatable information so that our citizens will not understand it, will not question it, and therefore will not hold us to account. And so during my time as a minister, I really pushed to increase access to economic and financial information in my ministry. For instance, I was the first one to release regular publications around debt, and we know how important this issue is now with COVID-19. It also helped me increase efficiency. I used also to tell my staff that you know, the private sector must not have the monopoly of efficiency. We in the public sector, as public officials, we need to strive to work faster, to deliver quality public services to both our economies and our citizens. And so I think that digitizing processes within our ministries helps us do that. A second objective, and not the least, is that by digitizing processes, we also help curb corruption. And we know that, again, corruption is also part of, you know, this magma. I mean, we put it in the big magma of governance, and we know how important that is for investors, for also development partners. And by digitizing processes, we also cut down on the opportunities that some public officials may seize to ask for bribes, you know, for tasks that are part of their daily jobs. Last but not least, I think the third objective is also to help us collect more and better data. And I think that this is, again, very important when it comes to Africa's, to the perception around our continent, because it will also enable us to contribute to the data economy. It will also help us shape and own our narrative. And it will also help us enhance evidence-based policy making, which is important for us when it comes to develop better policies, implement them, and have the capacity to monitor and evaluate them to be sure that we are delivering, you know, on our policy outcomes, ultimately impacting the living conditions of our populations. Now, coming to the how can we do that? I think I would see four aspects. Number one, we need to have unwavering commitment from authorities. And I, of all people, can tell you how difficult it was for me to push from a digital agenda in my ministry. I faced reluctance, I faced resistance, but I kept on. I think it's important. Number two, I think we need also to be clear about where should the owners of driving such a strategy be. And in Guinea in 2018, we decided that it could no longer be the responsibility of a line ministry, and it should move up to the Prime Minister's office and to ensure coordination, coherence, and also to be sure that we look after quality standards. Number three, what kind of organization can do that? I think that an agency seems to me better equipped because it has the agility, the flexibility, and you know, when we talk about technology, we know that it evolves at a breakneck pace. This is a fast changing environment, and we need organizations that are able to adapt swiftly. Number four, and not the least, we need to partner with the private sector, whether national private sector and foreign private sector, and especially, you know, building on what our creative, talented youth masters in terms when it comes to new technologies. And I think that this is very important because it will enable us to also push for more context-specific solutions, therefore contributing to sustainable development and sustainable solutions.
Great. Well, let's take that one step further and turn the conversation over to the issue of energy. And Weldon Turner joins us. Weldon has been, again, one of the pioneers in renewable energy in Israel and throughout Africa. He also teaches at the Bar-Ilan University School of Business, and we've been very fortunate to have him as one of our research supervisors with our fellows that are working on field projects in Kenya and Rwanda, Burundi, and other places. Weldon, you and your colleagues have been working closely with USAID and Power Africa and others in transferring and adapting technology in energy and electrification. We know the huge importance of trying to overcome that the barrier to a billion people not having electricity this late into the 21st century. So how do we accelerate the pipeline for meeting energy poverty and challenges throughout the continent? How do we actually go about this business, and how have you done it in terms of lighting up the nations?
Well, first of all, Glenn, thank you very much. I really appreciate the invitation. I think you have to look at the problems that we face in a more holistic standpoint. A lot of international organizations do what's called single factor analysis. They'll take one problem and they'll try to tackle one problem, when in fact there is a host of what I call institutional voids or problems, and you need to deal with those problems in a holistic macro basis. So for instance, in energy, we find that each country you go work in, it's as if you're reinventing the wheel. You have to reinvent documents, you have to reinvent the process. And I think that if we can, working with and taking and listening to governments, if we can have a standard process that governments can pick from and help them, as opposed to dictating to them, I think the process would be shorter. The key is that time is risk. The shorter the time, the less risk. The more time it takes for a project, the more risk there is. And if developers and IPPs know that the process is going to be extremely long, they won't do it. There is, as we know, there is a lot of money. There are more money than projects. And that's really not the problem. The problem is getting the projects done in a decent time. So therefore, governments and the people can have energy. That is the biggest problem.
So if we do that, what is missing in this whole process? I mean, how do we, if we can just maybe mix it up and any of you have ideas, what's missing in order to do that? What is the connective tissue we have to stretch here in order to accelerate?
I think as far as energy is concerned, and even other products, even technology, there really should be, it's called bankability. Projects need to be bankable, whether they're road projects, energy projects, technology projects, they're all projects. and they need to be bankable. You have to have equity investors and debt investors. And if that process, again, if that process is shorter, the risk is less and you'll have more of them. And a standardized process that countries can choose from and work with them and listen to them will be most successful. Not all countries can do tenders as the first project. Some countries can, some countries can't. It should be staging of projects. And if they can do that and have the ability to do that, then I think they'll be much more successful.
Strive, would you want to weigh in on that? Feel that that's about what's missing?
I don't think anything is missing. To be honest with you, that's different from any other region of the world. You know, it's important not to look at Africa like some exotic place. If you're an investor, if you come looking for what investors look for, it's a lot easier to work with you. I mean, I'm in the energy space, and we don't have a problem of investors. We don't have a problem of getting projects done. We have projects in every single African country. The key there is localized knowledge. Work with Africans themselves. But that is not unique to Africa. It's unique to any part of the world. If you reach out and work with and find the right partners, you know, most of these things are surmountable. Okay, obviously there are going to be places of conflict, and you avoid a place of conflict anywhere in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, Africa has no more conflicts than Asia or any other region of the world. We have our fair share, yes, but you've got to have the right perspective, find the right partners, you know, but the challenges will be no different than any other part of the world.
You know, Mulata, would you like to respond to that question? Do you think there's anything additionally that we can do to accelerate the process?
Well, I would like maybe to come back to that risk perception issue, because you know, I often found myself trying to make people understand that sometimes the risk is often, the perception is often biased when it comes to Africa, although it has changed, of course, in a positive way through the decades. But still, you will still hear, you know, oh, it's extremely risky to invest in this on this continent. And sometimes I just find myself asking people, but do you think it is more risky to invest in Africa than sending men and women to the moon or to Mars, which will probably happen soon? This is Africa on the planet Earth, and it's not that risky. I think that the issue is really around how do we manage that risk. And again, it links back to the question of building that data economy, being able to collect more and better data so that this will inform decision of investors, and especially impact investors, which I would also believe would be more, I would say, sensitive to context-specific issues, because they are looking at this, you know, triple bottom line profits, but not only profit, also people and planet. And so for me, that's why I think that impact investment is a good thing. It can really help us provide funding, expertise, which will lead to cross-pollination when it comes to new technology, and also help us deal with, help us on how we can improve governance overall by working on governance of businesses and companies. So for me, it's really, we need to also change this position, this posture that we have when it comes to risk in Africa. And again, yeah, I will second the fact Africa is very diverse. Each country has its specific. It's true that we also are united by some African values. We are also very, very diverse, which is a very good thing. I think we need to have people with a more discerning views.
Mm-hmm. Let's just ask if we can pull up the one slide on, not so much about what's missing, but how we put the pieces together. How we have the pieces of the puzzle here in terms of technology and the like. If we can pull up that one little view, because and there's green, the markets are responding to this. There's a lot of green shoots out there in terms of what's gone on just in the last year. We've got have around $913 billion that's been invested in green and social and sustainability bond market that are outstanding. Last month, there was $9 billion of issuance there. But how do we take the technology and accelerate the solutions to compress the time through finance and tech leverage, but creating business models and the co-innovation partnerships that can do that? Well, if we do that, then you can take that down. I just wanted to establish this idea that we need to build co-innovation teams across platforms in a kind of a matrix management way. And how do we do that, Bonnie? Or you work also with the new DFC, with the new U.S. Development Finance Corporation. They're anxious to put their $60 billion to work and $5 billion of credit facility that had been at USAID. But how do we channel that in terms of project development, or Gil, or anybody else that would want to weigh in there? And how it works with the nexus of problems of food and energy and water and health. I mean, on water, which you've worked in that area, Mulatto, 52% of the hospital beds in the world are filled with people that have water-carried diseases, just the issues of clean water, and then moving that clean water around or recycling water into agriculture, and dealing with what had been done in Israel of decoupling the use of water with increasing productivity. We need to do more with less and have more natural resources to share in terms of triggering the development. But Bonnie or Gil or anybody else want to jump in on that one?
Sure, I'll be quick on it, but I like the intersection that you have of the Venn diagrams and showing the areas of overlap and the need really for having that consolidated, holistic approach to encouraging investment in any emerging or frontier markets. I think one of the things too that's particularly useful for us to think about is all of the different actors that are in this space, whether it's a development agency or a development finance entity or international financial institutions, or what we are so excited about, which is the institutional investor market. Strive makes a really good point by saying that Africa is not exotic. Africa is a series of sovereign nations, and investors who enter into emerging and frontier markets go in with an understanding that there is an element of risk. But the key piece of it is helping them understand how much of that risk is real and financially driven, and how much of it is in their minds. And it's based on whether it's movies or books or history, but not necessarily grounded in 21st century reality. So sometimes markets, while not exotic, are just unfamiliar. And one of the ways that governments can come in to assist and gently nudge forward investors is by demystifying what some of that risk actually looks like. And I think Weldon is the perfect example of that for the audience that's gathered here today. The work that he's done with Gigawatt Global, which developed the first Power Africa bankable deal to reach financial closure, was in Rwanda. And Power Africa is a whole of US government effort to electrify Africa and run by USAID. Power Africa recently assisted Gigawatt Global to secure a last tranche of funding and financing for its 7.5 megawatt solar photovoltaics project in Burundi. So to go right next door, but to a very different economic environment from Rwanda to Burundi, as Weldon said, you're dealing with different systems and your different regulations, different regulatory environment, different levels of sophistication, but the ability to move forward, de-risk investments, and bring to bear all of the tools that are available for that development, I think are critically important, and he showcases them so very well. So I wanted to wrap my comments with that. I turn it over to anybody else who has thoughts on it.
I'd like to say, Glenn, I'd like to say a word.
Please.
You know, when we talk about development projects in Africa, regardless of the magnitude and volume, when we look at societies, we know that a necklace is always as strong as its weakest link. A chain will be always as strong as its weakest link. So, and I think we should be very much aware not to have overwhelming investments in communities or in environments that cannot absorb those investments. And sometimes we witness, I think especially in Africa, where you have a huge variety of development levels in one single country. And if we have overwhelming investment, or if we have investment which is not suitable to the grassroots level, which at the end of the day it has to address, I think it's bound to fail. And that's something which...
Though that Weldon, that you've done, though, you took an example of the Agahazo Shalom Youth Village that was built for from the genocide, on a model of youth villages we had after World War II. And they're a partner in that solar field, which displaced how many millions of dollars of diesel imports with scarce foreign exchange that Rwanda doesn't really have for that, and replaced it with renewable energy. And if I'm not wrong, the children there are getting the health insurance paid for 25 years off of the receipts.
Exactly, which is to us, one of the more important aspects is that it helps the youth village become independent, financially independent. But I think one of the problems is, as I travel around to the US and Europe to talk to investors, is that they don't understand the enormous opportunity that emerging and frontier markets possess. And it doesn't make a difference whether it's energy or agriculture or coffee, for example. There is enormous opportunity in emerging and frontier markets. And I think the faster that we and the international community helps institutional investors understand that, I think the better off we all will be.
Strive, you had a point I think you were going to make.
Just to, I love coming to Israel, Jill. And it's a beautiful country, great. But when I'm in Israel, I don't think I'm in Syria. And I don't measure how well Israel is on the basis of what's happening in the Middle East. I know Israel for what Israel is, and I know what's happening elsewhere in the region. Okay? And so you got to also look at it from that perspective when you're looking at Africa. Okay, when all is said and done, we've got a remarkably small number of countries that have challenges in which you cannot invest. But as an investor, you have to know the place you're going to invest in. And, you know, there's no amount of sugarcoating that I can give to an investor. Someone coming as far as Africa should be able to get their own data and know what it is they're going to make their call on. Okay, as an entrepreneur, what I can say to you is, again, using the very universally accepted principles that have made your nations what they are, is that they're not built by development agencies. They're built through entrepreneurs. You have to work with entrepreneurs and support entrepreneurs so that We have the Mark Zuckerbergs in Africa. You just got to find them and work with them. Okay, and these are the guys that will sort out the challenges that are on the ground. Okay, that's what makes entrepreneurs successful, dealing with the challenges that are there. But it's when we conflate development with investment that for me is always problematic. Okay, for me, the jury is out on impact investing. Okay, it's not come in yet. But we can talk about investment, capital for direct return. We, Africa, are ready to support that, okay? But I cannot, I need to stress that you can't conflate development, just like you can't conflate politics into development, because that too is going to be problematic. We look forward to very practical engagements where people listen to what we as Africans would like to see. And if people don't agree with what we'd like to see, at least we want to feel we've been heard. And then we work our way forward from there. But Africa's doing well. This pandemic aside, okay, we've had sustained growth for more than 20 years now. Most countries have taken real measures to attract investment, and they are seeing it, both from the East and the West.
And are you also seeing regional collaboration in Africa as well?
Sorry? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And we spend, one thing I can say to you about Africa is it's the only continent where we can all sit in one room as leaders and no one is going to walk out because somebody else is there. Okay? And that is the first thing that you want to be able to do if a region is going to develop. You have to be able to accept diversity, accept differences, and try and engage. So we are trying to engage. We are trying to see how we can develop platforms like the Africa Free Trade Area, which I participated in promoting and developing, where we can take advantage of our scale. We've got 1.2 billion people. Our GDP is almost the same as that of India. And our populations are not much different. But India is a nation and we're a continent.
Well, yes, Milado, last point, we've run out of time, unfortunately. We could go on. There's so much to talk. Milado, please, last word.
Yeah, what I've just heard also makes me think about a couple of things. And that may maybe somehow contradict what Weldon just said earlier about time and risk, But the thing is that Africa also rewards patient investors. And I think when they come to our many countries, they need to be patient. They need to do their homework. Because I've been, since I left government, I've met several entrepreneurs that are very structured, that are exporting also, and also transforming, their what they grow or extract from our country. And yet there's still a gap in terms of funding, so they cannot grow their business so that it will create also more job opportunities, and for the states have this ability to collect more taxes. Another thing, the world needs, I think we all need to understand also that the world needs a prosperous Africa. In 2050, we will be 2.5 billion people, approximately 30 or 40 of which will be young people. This is both an opportunity and also a risk. And the challenges I hear about investing also makes me, convince me even more that as Africans, Strive just mentioned, Minister Strive just mentioned the regional, the economic regional integration. We also need as Africans to be able to find and to promote integration of our financial markets so that we are also able to provide funding that is in local currencies, and maybe in a future, in a near future, or maybe a longer future, funding in a unified currency for Africa. And I think that this has been again stressed with this COVID-19, you know, and all these discussions and debate around debt cancellation and debt relief. Thank you.
Well, exactly. I think those are all points that are extremely well taken. I appreciate all the time that everyone has spent with us today. There's so much more to discuss, and blending these financial channels, of carving the, just like as we do with agriculture, we need the water, we need the capital, both the social and the financial capital and the human capital that's deployed. We need to have the job creation and the capital formation at all of those levels. But I want to thank you all, our esteemed panelists, for joining us today. And if you want to find out more about their work and support their ongoing efforts to invest in emerging and frontier markets, please visit their respective websites. And please visit milkeninstitute.org to learn more about what the Institute's doing in response to the challenges of the day, including the COVID-19 tracker, treatment and vaccine tracker, and all the previous seminars and ongoing podcasts featuring our chairman, Mike Milken, an array of thought leaders. I highly recommend the podcast recently of Mike and Nobel laureate Paul Romer, just precisely on this nexus between finance and economics and trying to accelerate this process. But check into the information from our field school and labs here in Israel and Africa at www.milkeninnovationcenter.org. Anyone who'd like to get involved with the Institute's work, please feel free to reach out to me at Yago@milkeninstitute.org. And we look forward to working with you on innovative technologies and financial models that will catalyze the solutions to these problems throughout the world. And thank you really for joining us today, and stay with us as we work towards the global conference in October and beyond as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you.
Good, Glenn.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Toda rabah.
Glad to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.